All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're having a good day. So, I've been hard at work over here trying to figure out what the agenda is with the large language models and the AI in general. Obviously, this is a hot button issue. A lot of people have a lot of opinions on it, and we see that the establishment seems to be going full speed ahead on it. So, a lot of people are concerned, and I think rightfully so. Um, I don't think all the concerns are founded and justified. I think a lot of people are turning against math, which I think is a huge mistake. Um, Really, we need to be turning against the people who are misusing math, weaponizing psychology, et cetera, to ruin people's livelihoods and humanity in general. That's my stance, and I stand by it. And the more I think about it and analyze the moving parts here, I do think that a lot of my analysis is correct as far as what's going on and whether we should use or shun the technology. And I also have gotten some things wrong, but it also kind of ties into the former category there. Um, for example, well, let's just dive in, I guess, on this slide here. So, if you are on groupdiscover.com, my website, you would have seen this video. I shared it the other day. This is the CEO of Anthropic in an interview. This is the first time I've really seen this guy. He came out of OpenAI, and these are the two big companies who are the establishment darlings. They're doing the regulatory capture. They're pulling up the ladder behind them. They're trying to run into the issues themselves and then solve them and be like, well, we need to force everybody else to do this. This is dangerous. This is unsafe. And so definitely people to pay attention to. And I was watching this video again. I didn't have time to watch it a second time, but I've watched it once. And I find it to be very telling what they're telegraphing here. They want more regulation, and they keep talking about how the scaling laws are holding up. They keep talking about basically if they throw more data at it, if they throw more scale at it, that they can make more and more powerful models. This guy said that he runs each model past a group that's affiliated. I forgot exactly the governmental agency. It's like the military or something, or the CIA or some crazy group, and basically they see if it's has any catastrophic risks associated with it. So they ask it questions about, can it train other models, which is interesting, right? Because I don't think they want us to be able to train models. So that's one of the reasons why that's kind of what I've been focused on in using these new tools. I'm like, okay, we got to train our own models. We got to start building the stuff that they're going to censor later. And so we got to extract as much as we can while we can. But the other thing, of course, they're like trying to come up with excuses like, oh, well, nuclear armament and, oh, well, bio warfare, et cetera, et cetera. Or they might interfere with the elections. All the normal stuff that you would expect them to fearmonger and come up with excuses why people can't publish math on the internet that's correct, right? They don't want us to be able to say 2 + 2 = 4. They find that we're a lot less of a threat, a lot less dangerous when we think that 2 + 2 = 5, right? We can't really do much when we think 2 + 2 = 5. So can't publish those numbers on the internet if they're correct. So obviously the establishment wants this incredible power for themselves. They want to sell it and ration it and meter it, charge nickel and dime on it. And then they want to regulate it out of everybody else's hands. And then they want to instill their propaganda, their conditioning, all of their electioneering that they plan on doing, certainly. Although I mostly am of the opinion that the elections are just totally rigged on so many levels. That it's not something that I'm like yearning for, believing in any respect. But I do find watching these people very interesting. So I keep a close eye on like the NVIDIA CEO, Jensen Huang, Sam Altman of OpenAI, this guy here from Anthropic. And they do seem very concerned about certain uses of the technology that I think are worthwhile, that I think that we should pursue. And one of them is training our own models, making systems that can generate code very quickly so that we can manifest their ideas. And so that's one reason why I wanted to talk about this today. So today I want to talk mostly about how to utilize this technology to write code. And, in the thumbnail here I said AI code gen. We're already there. Artificial intelligence can generate code, generate a lot of code. The problem is having it in a cohesive format that's actually useful and can continually be improved and reach a great endpoint that's really, really useful, or even better, reusable. And that's the challenge. Just like it can write a bunch of English, but to get it to make like the perfect book is a much harder challenge. And so just to give you an idea here, this is the Open Router website. This is showing us that the last 2 weeks have been record-breaking weeks as far as LLM usage through the site, which I find to be an interesting metric to see how everything's going. A lot of people are plugging into this, and I do think that at a certain point, if people don't plug in and utilize this new technology, it's kind of like saying, well, I don't use computers, I don't use phones. Like, more power to you, I guess, except for, I guess, really not really. Not really more power to you, because in a sense, it's less power to you if you're not going to utilize the technologies that everybody else is using. And there are downsides with it and concerns, of course. So we talked previously about some of my best ideas for generating code. A lot of it has to do with the plan and the execution of the plan. And there is, of course, a huge need for humans to guide the process and to see, okay, well, it's going off in the wrong direction here. Let's get it back on track, keep it on the rails. And that's something that we developed in this series so far, the workflows. And this is stuff that everybody can develop on their own. I'll be publishing it at some point if you just want to piggyback on my work. But for example here, let's make a new project, PHP backend for PostgreSQL table. I was working on this one the other day. I thought it'd be an interesting one to just kind of play around with a little bit. I'm calling it Stanza Designer. It's going to be a plugin and then also a web page that uses the plugin. And the way it works is I have a stanza here, 4 lines, could be more, could be less, and each line has a certain number of syllables. And it's not exactly how musical authorship or lyrical authorship works, because you can always like break up a syllable into 2 syllables, and it's also a little bit more about the beat grid behind in the meter and where vowel sounds and consonants and rhyming sounds fall on the grid. But I just thought this would be a fun example. Like my dream as far as LLMs helping us write code is like, I want to be able to think of something like this. Like, okay, I want to be able to specify all my different syllables of a stanza, be it for poetry or for lyrics. And then if I select a certain, like this isn't even a great example here, this word amazing, I'm just kind of getting ahead of myself. But if I select a certain syllable, I really want to be able to say, okay, I think this should start with, or maybe even a better example would be, I really want an E sound. Let's see, where's an E sound? C, right? It's like, okay, I want it to have an E sound here and then an E sound here. Because a lot of times when you're writing music, you kind of just do gibberish. You kind of vocalize and you get attached to the vocalization, but sometimes you're not saying anything, not really using language. But like, okay, I want an E sound there. So this is just an idea, but I come up with these ideas a lot, and some of them are within the realm of what ChatGPT can do in one go. If you just prompt it, it's like, wow, that's pretty good. Like, for example, in this vein, I've been kind of working up to using this plugin, making this plugin, and I've derived a CSV file with like every word in the English language and how many syllables the word has and the pronunciation of the word. So this will be helpful in a lot of different ways, for rhyming, for knowing how many of these syllables a certain word I type in constitutes, knowing what sound it starts with, what sound it ends with, etc. So I had this CSV and I said, I have a CSV called this, which contains a list of English words and the number of syllables and their pronunciation. What's a good PostgreSQL database table for this? Don't use varchar, use text instead. So it gave me this. Now, there's actually a problem with this because, as we've talked about before, ChatGPT has this propensity to not surround field names with double quotes when it should. For example, here, since there are capital letters, you need to use double quotes or it's just going to make everything lowercase. But that's not a huge issue here. I mean, this would have been extremely trivial and easy to do on my own, but it's this part I would have had to look up, the constraint, the named constraint. Basically, this says words and pronunciation counts should be unique. Actually, this is wrong. This is wrong here. It should be, actually, no, that's right. Word and pronunciation should be unique. Sorry, that's right. Because you might have the same word multiple times with different pronunciations. For example, abdomen. I forgot the other pronunciation right now. There's another one. I'm blanking on it, but there's a lot of words that you can pronounce in multiple ways. So I could just do a follow-up here and say, you need to wrap the field names with capital letters in double quotes. My point here is that a lot of the tasks that we need ChatGPT to do are trivial, and it can knock them out, and we can do revisions, and it can make it even better and better. But if I had just said, make me a web page, and I just described exactly what I wanted to do, it would have failed. It couldn't have put all the pieces together. Not currently, anyway. So we have a couple of different approaches. Either we can manually do the planning and the development, which there is certainly a need for, or we have to have a workflow that systematically divides and conquers the task into smaller chunks. And there's a key aspect here that the plan is really going to dictate the success or failure. In the first couple drafts, if we don't throw them out if they're bad, will also kind of set us up for failure in a lot of ways. If we just keep developing it and saying, oh, I'm getting this error, fix this, and oh yeah, it's not quite working, but if you don't look at actually what you've developed, and this transcends coding, I think that a lot of other endeavors are very similar. If you're writing a book, writing a screenplay, these other types of large projects that aren't just one pass, that take revision and revision. All right, so let's kind of play this example out here. Got so many tabs, I keep losing my spot. All right, so we have this table. Let me, and I really want to live in a world where people can just manifest their ideas. I think that that's a great thing. Be they books or movies or programmatic content, where it's like developing a system, database-driven web application, for example. I think it's going to be a much better place if, it's not just Hollywood or Pixar that can make videos that have messages. Okay, I'm trying to multitask here. Okay. So we made this database the other day. Let's just throw this in here. I've already kind of started this, it looks like. So we'll just use this one that I've already marked up a bit more. And I've got to open up the database connection. Again, it's super easy with PostgreSQL. In this case, I'm on Windows, so I just do psql-uppercase-u Postgres. And then I connect to, in this case, Lyrics database. So /c is connect. I'm now connected to the database. So I can just paste this in here, create table. Table is created. And now I can use it. So what I like to do is make a backend, so a series of functions that constitute all the things I need to do to my to this table here, which is the word pronunciation table. So let's make a workflow, since we've already built this system for helping us just flesh these queries out really easily. So let's see. Word pronunciation backend. So this is one of the lowest hanging fruits, is just generating the queries automatically. So all the boilerplate stuff, all the things that you want to systematically include in your prompts without having to think. I mean, you could just have this in like a document somewhere and just fill in the different parts. But we took it to the next level with this. What I like about this is it saves it. So I can come back here and I can update it and easily find all the different parts. So actually I put this in the wrong spot. Let's see, a table for storing all the English words with number of syllables and pronunciation. And then methods definition. What are some method names and parameters? So I can click run prompt, or I can copy this off into a new ChatGPT. And so I do think we're at the point where ChatGPT is an incredibly useful tool. And that's kind of going back to what my analysis on the situation. They're trying to front run this crazy new technology with their establishment offerings. And I wish it wasn't the case. I wish there were other providers out there that were not tied in with the establishment and weren't trying to regulate and ruin the world. But since that's not the case, the question is, do we use this or not? And I think that there will be a time, probably in the not too distant future, where I probably won't want to use it, or we'll use it for very limited things. I'm already using it for very limited things. I look at the best analog here as being YouTube. And there was a couple years where, foolishly, I thought that it was going to be this great force for good for humanity, because it was actually driven by the best content in a whole bunch of different ways. First of all, people were just watching what they wanted to watch and what was giving them value and sharing, and things were going viral that more or less deserved it. But also, even their algorithm was pushing things that people were liking, which compounded the awesomeness in the early years. I think very similarly, they're trying to get people hooked on the technology. They're trying to show people what it can do, and then they're going to fearmonger and false flag and come up with all these excuses why, we can't just let anybody make their own models. And I've been looking at making my own models. I've been making my own BERT models, for example, and it is a very powerful tool, even with BERT, which is not the biggest model architecture. But it does become kind of prohibitively expensive when you move up to the next size class. For example, the 7 billion, 8 billion parameter models. I was looking into that. I want to know what they're capable of, like fine-tuning these Mistral or Qwen 2 or Llama 3 models. I've heard that they're pretty powerful, and you can train them in a similar way to BERT, but for generative text. BERT is more for text classification. All right, let me just get these thoughts down here. So add word, update word. We don't really need these, do we? Yeah, actually we do, because we need to fill this database up. Get word. Let's come back here. I don't get why. Okay. Update word, number syllables, delete word. Let's see. Delete word and get word should take word ID. So one of the big pushes that was kind of shoved down our throats, if you're in the AI space trying to figure things out and seeing what the prevailing trends coming are, is agents. They kept telling us, agents are the way to do it. You say, okay, you make a bunch of AI agents. You say, this agent is for coming up with the database. This agent's for quality assurance. This database is for front end. This not database. This agent is for database. This agent is for front end. This agent is quality assurance. And that didn't pan out at all, because really what we need is very structured, on the rails workflowed approaches that are very controlled and overseen by the actual human developer. Now, things are going to change as these models get bigger and bigger. That's another thing I wanted to mention, is I think that these big companies like Anthropic and OpenAI are purposefully stagnated at this point. They're purposefully sitting on their hands. They could make these models better in a whole host of different ways, but they're not doing it, which is kind of curious as to why not. Now, they have a huge lead. Nobody can really compete with the amount of money they're expending to achieve what they've achieved. And for whatever reason, they're just like, oh, no, we're not going to really continue pushing new models out. Now, they did push like the mid-tier models a bit further. So I should say the mid-size models. So, for example, ChatGPT 4o, and then Anthropic Sonnet 3.5. These models are much, much smaller than what these companies could actually train and deploy. Their other older models, which are still being hosted and served up, are like behemoths in comparison. They're just absolutely giant. And for whatever reason, they're pushing the frontier and saying, okay, well, we're going to give you this new class of models that's much smaller, but actually outperforms the last class of models. And the question is, okay, why not just train a bigger version of this? And they say, oh, it's coming. It's coming. And it's very curious as to why this is all happening at the speed it is. Okay, so it should take word ID. Let's just finish this. Get word. Search words by syllable count. Let's do replace search words by syllable count, search words by pronunciation with a more general search words. Remove. I can just do this manually. We don't need count words. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just kind of walking through the state of things right now. I've got some other ideas about using BERT for parsing out these responses from the AIs. And then I think that if we could train our own 7 billion models, 7 billion parameter models, it would take this to the next level. But I don't really have the budget for that. So I'm just making do with what I have. And the crazy part is that they're just going to keep making the LLMs will continue to get better and better. In some respects. In other respects, like if you're hoping that there's going to be the next state-of-the-art model that caters towards conspiracy theorists, yeah, that's not going to happen. So it's in certain fields, certain wheelhouses, and anything else you have to do yourself. All right, so let's bring this back over to our workflow. Where'd it go? Here we go. So I don't need any of these. That's really all I need here. 5 functions. So, for example, with the agent stuff, there's almost no way I could imagine, even if I threw 1,000 agents at this, and it's almost like the more agents you throw at this, the worse it's going to be. These AI agents that everyone's pushing, there's no way they would come up with this, which is what I want. So at this point, we need to just kind of oversee each step and be like, okay, no, let's fix that. And this is important before you just have it generating hundreds of thousands of lines of code or hundreds of pages for your book to say, okay, well, what are we actually doing here? Let's make sure our plan makes sense. Let's make sure we're going in the right direction. All right, so write the code. Let's copy this and run it in ChatGPT. Something else I found that's really cool is that you can export your entire ChatGPT history. And of course, it's not great that ChatGPT is remembering all of our conversations in the sense that they're going to train their models on it, etc. But at least we should train our own models on it as well, if we're going to use it. So we're going to talk about that today as well. You can just go over to the settings up here. Let me just check I'm not sharing anything. So you click the little button at the top right, then you go settings, then you go data controls on the left, export data. And you can just export it. It gives you a big JSON file. And you might have to write like a little script. I wrote one yesterday, or a handful. And I'm going to show that in a second. For extracting the useful stuff from there. And what I consider useful. All right, so let's go back to the code that's generating. Don't know why it's so hard to find my tabs today. So I keep improving the workflow so that when it's time to generate this PHP for the PostgreSQL table, it's much closer to what I actually want. And this, for example, is looking pretty good. So each time I do this, it's smoother and smoother. So let's grab this. So it's giving me the query and the methods, which is perfect. So let's save this here. Word pronunciation query. And word pronunciation methods. So methods first. Then the query. Again, I like to separate it this way because I want all the heavy hitting stuff in its own file, standalone helper functions, so that if I ever need those in a cron job or if I ever need those in just a standard script, I can just require the or import the code and run it. And then this file is just, this query file here is just for managing the HTTP requests from web pages. Okay, so coming back up here, let's see if I can find that other page I had. It's so annoying how many tabs I have, and none of them seem to have what I want. Give me 1 second. So I got to find that other. I had that good explanation for when we were making the table that had like the CSV. All right, I can't find it at the moment. So let's just get that CSV file. I know it's in here somewhere. Where'd it go? basically what I'm trying to do now is import my data set into this new database, but I can't remember where my data set is. Let's see, is it my music folder? It's really not even too important. This is more of just an example that I was walking through. Oh, I could search for, let's see. Let me search for num syllables. One of my favorite features in Notepad++ is search all open. Okay, here we go. It's in my Python folder. So we'll bring that over to my PHP folder. Open this up. Okay, so let's copy some of this just to show you how I like to use ChatGPT. It's very capable, but we do need like a human in the driver's seat, which can be sometimes kind of annoying and could be improved upon. For example, I just want to be able to think up ideas and have it generate the code, especially a bunch of reusable code. For example, I had this idea, a couple of ideas having to do with neural networks that would just be interesting. I don't want to spend too much time on them, but it would just be interesting to have the code generated and look at it. For example, training a convolutional neural network for playing chess, or training a convolutional / feed-forward neural network for playing Snake. Like I see demos sometimes of people doing this, and it looks like it'd be a fun way to get that technology under your belt. All right, let's see. I have this CSV in the PHP folder with these scripts. Write me another script that will import each of these words using the new, what's the function? Like add word. Yeah. So this is another benefit of separating query and methods. We can write a script like this, and it will just not have to do anything with a web page. But then we can also write web pages that can easily interface with our database by using the query. So this one has nothing to do with query, it's just going to be methods. Let's do import word list PHP, and I can run this from the command line. So I need to change this to the actual file name, and let's try it here. I spent so much time today and yesterday trying to get the 7 billion parameter model trained. So much of a headache. For whatever reason, these models, like, you have to be authenticated, and it's hard to find places to download them. And then when I finally got a good idea, I was like, I could just use Qwen, which doesn't have the authentication required. And so I started the training script, and then my computer just gets so bogged down, it almost crashed. I'm like, oh, I've got to kill this stuff off. So that's still a pain trying to get the, trying to fine tune our models, because they put out a lot of these base models, and the, let me start this off here. Base models are pretty cool. They predict the next word. All right, 1 second. It's giving me an error. Oh, probably because I need to set up the databases. So we should have a config file here. Just need to include this so it knows the DB connection stuff. Okay, that's not my CSV file. And I really wish this was more accessible to people who aren't programmers. It'll get there. It'll get there, but programmers still have a leg up in this regard. Just being able to read the errors and figure out what's going on without having to go back and ask ChatGPT. But you could just ask ChatGPT, I'm still having this problem. Can you help me with this? Okay, let's see. The table does not exist, it says. Let me check to see what database we're using here. Should be right. Oh, well, I'm not sure. Let's see. Did we make the table in the right spot? We connected to lyrics, so /DT will tell us the table's in here. Oh, it's a word pronunciation table. That's the problem. So down here it says, this is the table name. I changed that. And I forgot to update them. So we'll just replace all. All right, unexpected word pronunciation, line 17. Okay, that makes sense because it's not escaped. So when you have double quotes inside of other double quotes, it'll break your string unless you escape them. So I'm just going to go one at a time here, make sure. Okay, that should help. Oh, nope. Num syllables does not exist. You know what? I made a number of mistakes here. Let's go back up to here. To here. And we'll just go back at it and ask again here. So let's say I actually renamed the table to, and let me just copy my table declaration. I do think that the database table stuff is the most straightforward and easiest to achieve with these language models. It's actually trickier to do the front end, like a really nice jQuery plugin. Can be tricky. And that's actually what we're trying to do today. So I actually renamed the table. Note, you need to use double quotes when talking about tables or fields with capital letters. So I actually like this approach for making changes to scripts. Going back to ChatGPT and having it refactor. One of the things that I'm hoping to get to today, I'm sure I will, is trying to get a better understanding and automatically incorporating suggestions it comes up with into our code. And a lot of that is going to come down to parsing and understanding the text it writes. Be it these little headers here, the text descriptions, and even comments in the code. And then also being able to parse out, functions and classes when they start and end in the code. Okay, I think I just need this. All right, take two. Boolean given, so it's probably not connecting. So make dbcon add a word. Import the word list. Import words from CSV. Let's just exit. Let's do var dump. dbcon exit. See if that's, it's probably gonna be false. Yeah, Boolean false. Oh, invalid port number. PSQL port. Okay, so I'm not including. Oh, okay, I had to. That's right. We've got to change this. We lost that. Okay. There we go. Now we're connected, but I need to take off this exit statement. And we got an error. Permission denied for table. Okay. So we just have to grant permissions. I always put these commands in my notes. Wrong spot. All right. Take 3. There we go. So we're adding all these words in. We can come back over here and we can do select count from lyrics, or excuse me, from word pronunciation. Says it doesn't exist. Oh. So 80,000, 87,000. So you see how they're pouring in here. We can also enhance this. We can do select count and num syllables, and then group by num syllables. Order by num syllables. So somehow there's 4 words with 0 syllables. How does that make sense? Select all from words, or what is it? Word pronunciation, where num syllables is 0. F, S, M, sh, and THS. So I'll just probably delete these all, but let's just wait for it to finish up. Okay, it's done. Let's just delete these 0 syllable words, which are nonsense. And let's run this aggregate function again, group by num syllables. Interesting distribution there. So 17,000 words with 1 syllable, 61,000 with 2, 37,000 with 3, so we've already peaked. So the highest number is 2 syllables. One word has 14 syllables. Let's see what word that is. Where is it? Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Totally unnecessary. It's not a real word. All right. And 12 syllables? Anti-disestablishmentarianism. Again, really not needed. I'm going to delete it. What about, what's the next down? I'm just curious what's in here. This is from the CMU database for pronunciation. What about 9 syllables? Extraterritoriality. All right, that's fine. So we were able to pretty much spin up a backend for our new table, and we could have had multiple tables. And it's very helpful to have this workflow approach. There was some finagling we had to do, but I think coming up with a solid plan from the get-go, instead of just spinning out a bunch of code. And behind the scenes too, I'm like, let's just look at this query I ran. I gave it a number of examples. Of course, I gave it the tables, the methods that we came up with. I said to divide it into methods and query files. I gave it kind of the outline of how I want query to be. For methods, I say use the PG underscore methods for Postgres interaction, as opposed to the PDO stuff. I gave it some of these functions I wanted to use. And so I didn't have to type this out, because that's how many That's a 2,800 key hits if I was to do this manually. I'd have to do that 2,800 times. And so it's better to have a streamlined approach that takes the outputs from prior queries, prior responses to our prompts from the LLMs, and just continues to snowball it in the right direction. So that's the key of this approach, is staying in the right direction and just keep trucking ahead. All right, so there are other issues though, because as we get more and more complex, it kind of breaks down. And then it takes a lot of human in the loop steps. So one of the things, well, let's just look at this page because I've been thinking about this page. One of the things that is interesting to think about is how do we, like, what are the most useful prompts that we can think of, and how can we generate those prompts on the fly for the use cases that we're confronted with? So, for example, I have this page here where I can tap a tempo. All right, so that's just a couple of, it's not even the exact same tempo, but it's interesting to me to be able to just visualize something like this. So I was running into an issue where I was finding the tap for BPM tools to be very lacking. And I'd come up with, most of the tempos that I'd come up with, I'd realize, okay, this isn't just like keeping a constant rate. There'd be gaps, there'd be like sudden hits with a bunch of taps in a row. And so I was just wanting to visualize it and figure out what I was dealing with. And so that's what this page was written for way back in the day. And then it shows me here on this chart visually the gap between each of my taps, and then also in terms of milliseconds. And the idea was to somehow try to calculate the beat per minute. But then I'd run into issues even with that. I'm like, how do I do this? This is kind of confusing. But what I've recently thought about is, okay, what can the LLMs buy me in terms of this endeavor here? So, for example, I can click here. Let's see. So this is 2 rounds of, or like 1.5 rounds. It's a little annoying that I didn't do another click, another tap. But well, let's just clear this off and do a better round here. So it's important to get the, I think I messed up. I was like looking away and I missed the button. All right, I don't even know if that worked, but what I try to do is get the first of each round. Probably there, probably there. Okay, that's probably fine for this purpose. It's actually not too bad. It looks about right. 3 repetitions of the same tempo. So what I have here, and this is the new part that I added, just this copy button, copy end sections to. And so let's take that over to ChatGPT, just for example. This is what I'm having the most fun trying to think about, is how do I build web pages that allow people or myself to devise really interesting prompts that we can feed into language models. So we did that prior with the workflow to make the backend for the PostgreSQL database and other workflows like that. For example, though, where is it? This chord list page. I have a lot of ideas for just this button up here. It doesn't really do much yet. But AI Insights, where I could pick a key, click AI Insights, and come up with maybe some of these types of ideas. How to modulate to another key. So if I have 2 sections, one is in D major, the other one is in E major. How do I go up that whole tone gracefully in maybe a certain number of chords, etc. So this is one of the most interesting prospects that I can think of is instead of, I mean, you could tie this in behind the scenes and have it run, hit a LLM API endpoint somewhere, and then build it back into the interface. But it's kind of interesting to give it as a prompt, because then somebody can come and take it and do follow-up questions on it and actually see what it says and be like, oh, well, actually, what if we change the verbiage here and ask for something a bit different? So I have this a series of taps in microseconds. Can you suggest a good BPM to use for this? So this was just kind of an experimentation I was doing. Also, I could go to this other page I have and hit up some different other models. So you could try Firefox, or excuse me, what's it called? Llama 3. We could try Sonnet. We could try Qwen 2, E large. And it's just interesting to see because they all come back with different answers. This one says to use 282 beats per minute. This one says, and this made me feel better because I was having such a hard time, it must have been a couple years ago, trying to, from these tapped sequences, the sequence of taps, each spaced a certain number of milliseconds apart, how to calculate the beats per minute. It actually looks not too far off 120 in this case. Actually, wait, this is 77.64. And if I click there, so I kind of like this view. I know I'm getting off on a tangent, but these are the types of ideas I have, and I just want to be able to execute and get code for it and get, you know, usable answers. Let's see what these other models say. 280 says E, which is the same as ChatGPT. And again, it's also useful too to think about how do we parse out responses in a more useful way, because it's good that it shows its work. A lot of times showing the chain of thought helps the models get a more correct answer, because models have to spit out token after token after token, and they can't go back and fix mistakes. There's no like backspace key in there in vernacular. There's no edit. You can't go back and edit. So a chain of thought has been shown sometimes to be more correct, more accurate. In the future, there's going to be all sorts of crazy approaches that people do, and the models. These API-provided models will, in the future, I'm sure, do a bunch of crazy stuff, like maybe try 10 different approaches and go with whatever one seems the most correct, or just for example. Or do more planning up front and then implementation. This one here says 290. It's not far off. This one says 140 beats per minute, which is basically the same, except for you'd be doing with an eighth note what the other ones are doing with the fourth note. Quarter note, I should say. This one's way different. Llama 3 70 billion, which is not really the best model in the world, says the following options, either 123.7 or 92.7. Okay, that's just kind of a random thought there, but the idea of generating these prompts I find fascinating. All right, so back on track here. This was kind of the plugin that I was thinking of. I don't know how much we want to actually develop here, but I wanted to, let's see what we can do. So another approach that I had, that's what I can show here, is what I'm calling Code Sculptor. And what this allows me to do is just really easily send the code that I want, the latest version of the code that I want, and save different little snapshots. So I could save this query here as Stanza Designer Code 1. And then I could put like a little description here. And actually I have something about this in my that's annoying. In my workflows. Okay, so I can just copy this that I've already written up. And then I can just copy this prompt and it's going to take all of the code that I'm working on. And I can send this over in one swoop to ChatGPT. So this is where my mind is going, is I see the value of these models in terms of just acting on whatever information we send to it. So we can send a lot of code, a lot of text, a lot of debugging information, error messages. We can send documentation. We can send snapshots of variable state in certain parts of our code. And that's something else I wanted to talk about. And ask for something else and then act upon that. So what should we do here? Let's see. Actually, let's add a little bit more to this query here. So I can click this button here and I can go refresh, find the PHP. We can add these new methods that we just put in there. Word pronunciation methods, word pronunciation query. And then I can even say here, I have this table. These are my PHP files for integrating the plugin with the database. And then I can drag these over. My methods and my query. And then I'll grab my table. So again, what I find so fascinating about this is that the models continue to get better and better. They're already pretty amazing. I would have never believed you if you told me a couple years ago that this was possible or was coming. But I can see it firsthand, so I'm a quick to correct my mistakes and be like, okay, I was wrong, but I'll just jump to using it. So, but what's also crazy is the models are going to get better and better, but they're not perfect yet. So, I don't think they'll ever be perfect. I don't want them to read my mind. I don't think anybody should. I mean, different people have different opinions, I guess, but they can't read our minds, and I don't want them to read my mind. So, and there's benefits to it not being able to read my mind because I haven't solved the problem yet. So the answer's not in my mind. So it's interesting to just give it some vague request and see how it solves it. And sometimes it'll come up with something that I wasn't even thinking at all. Sometimes it'll just be way off the mark and give me garbage back. And it's interesting and fun for me, exciting for me to think about how do we use this because I have no shortage of ideas. Hopefully everybody watching has no shortage of ideas about what you'd want to make if you could make anything. And more of our ideas are actually achievable. And in the past, any one of our ideas maybe could be achievable. If we throw our life savings at it, if we throw all our time at it, we could solve any idea that we came up with, or a lot of them. But there's a certain bandwidth that we have, and that bandwidth is increasing massively. So now we can solve 10 far out ideas in a month, for example. Or 100. Maybe it's going to 1,000. So I want to live in a world where we just think up big ideas all the time and then flesh them out and implement them with the help of computers. Obviously, that's not the world everybody wants. So let me see here. I have this table. Put it in the wrong spot. So I can save this query and do Stanza Designer with backend. So now, let me just look at how much we're copying here. 500 lines. And probably from at least 4 different code files, which would have been a pain to go through and copy each of them and then put up the label on each. Here's my complete file, stanzadesigner.html, blah, 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 right? So I'm just trying to think of how do we throw as much into ChatGPT or these other models as possible to help to make them do the work, and we just throw stuff at them. Because basically we're seeing this subsidized approach, just like YouTube in the early days. Still today, they're trying to squeeze out all the competition by doing it cheaper and better than anybody else. Then they'll regulate and pass all these laws, and it's going to be terrible. So I'm all for coming up with alternatives and such, but there is this super low-cost option for us to plug into and get value from. And so one approach, and that's what I'm playing around with here, until I see a big reason why not to, is just to throw a bunch of stuff at this low-cost option and get as much out as you can. All right, so let's try this here. Here's what I want you to improve. When I type a word and hit enter, look up the word and the number of syllables / pronunciation from the database via the PHP backend. Let's see what else. When I select initial vowel or final sounds for a actually, let's rephrase this. Give me word ideas in the right-hand panel for when I select initial vowel or final sounds for a syllable. Also, I need to be able to specify how many syllables I want the word I'm looking for to be. Actually, a range would be best. So this is where it gets like hard to even put into English, what we want this to do. Also, I was thinking if there's a word here like amazing, I kind of want to be able to drag it into other spots in the line. Let's see. Also, once I type a word and hit enter, the text box should turn into a small badge of the word, non-editable. And I should be able to drag and reorder words in the line. Also, I want to be able to double click on a word that is non-editable and make it editable again. So let's just throw some more at it, see what it comes up with. Now, another thought that I had, I was brainstorming, we covered this a little bit the other day. How do we incorporate runtime information as more information that we can throw at ChatGPT when something's going wrong? And I've used this approach before, but it's been a while and I wasn't thinking about it. I was first thinking about how to use Selenium WebDriver, which we've covered in the web scraping tutorial that we did a couple weeks ago, I was thinking, like, how do I automatically put breakpoints so that I can capture variable information and return values from functions and the call stacks, etc. And I found a much better way to do this via, let's see if I can even find it in my chat history, via wrapping the functions. So this is one thing I wanted to do before the stream, is flesh this out. Here's one of my chats. So for anyone else who's trying to solve these big problems like I am, here's some more research and discovery that I've been working on. So you have like a wrap function here. Zoom out a bit. So this function here, wrap function, takes a function and the name of the function, which I feel like you could probably, I don't know, I feel like that could be detected from the function itself, but it's beside the point. And I don't really like this approach because it's pretty invasive for what I wanted. Let me keep scrolling down. I wanted one, and I think and this is something I was just doing. I had to walk to do an errand, and I was just chatting and brainstorming ideas. It's actually pretty amazing what can be accomplished just on a cell phone walking around. As far as understanding concepts and thinking and getting code that you could actually use theoretically. So this is more for a jQuery plugin, how to go at the prototype functions. Because that was one of my questions, is would that be achievable? Still not what I'm looking for here. Let's see. Then I switched over to Python. But basically, you could have something that automatically goes through the page. So for example, I don't think I have any functions on this page. Let's go to my chord list page. If I look at my window object, let's do object.keys window. These are all the globally accessible functions. There's 320 of them. Let me look for one that looks like I made it. Yeah, all these at the bottom here. Some of these are variables. Some of these are functions. So for example, window at let's do 302, index number 302. Zoom in for us. That's not right. Make chord item. So window dot make chord item. That's what I should have done. So that's a function. And I can loop over everything in my window. Let me do this. So this is all the keys. There's 320 of them. I could do a loop here. For var I equals 0, I is less than all the keys, dot length, I plus plus. If type of objects.keys at of window. So object.keys, you give it an object and it tells you all the keys as an array. So I need to look at the ith element of the array and then say if this is equal to a function, console.log window, actually object.keys at window I. That didn't work. Let's try something here. Oh, I see. Because they're all going to be strings, because... Come on. So if type of window at There they go. So those are all my functions on the page. Some of them are not mine, some of them are mine. And it's a bit overkill. I'm still trying to think of the best way to do this. But I could basically, once the page loads, run a loop like this and rework all of my functions. So just to reset all my functions. So it'd be like this. And I could basically, here I could put a wrapper function, replace with wrapper function that logs with $.ajax all the params and return value. So let me throw this back at this conversation I was having with ChatGPT on the go. I went into a conversation then about Python. Is it possible in Python? It seems to be more invasive to do it with Python. All right, let's help me with this idea. When the page is all set up, I want to wrap all my JS functions to log the parameters and return values. The function name, the call stack. I think that's my list. And the call stack. Using an Ajax call. So this could be more involved. I think I could spend a week on this. I don't know if I want to. But I could have a database, obviously, for storing all these logged informations. And I could have an ignore list that I would build up. There's a lot of functions that I would not want to track each call of. And it'd become pretty intense. And I don't know how much it'd buy me, but as far as like this approach that I'm doing where I have saved queries and say I hit an error and it's giving me an error, error on your model trainer, line 55, self.config numerical features is not defined. I could easily then at that point throw a bunch more information at it for debugging purposes. Maybe even the last run. Well, I guess the time it breaks, it wouldn't get a response value. You could do two Ajaxes, one that starts the record, the other that updates it with the return value. There's just a lot of ideas that we could keep pushing this ball forward. All right, what is this? Oh, okay. Need to click continue generating. This is the Stanza designer that we're working on. Here's the wrap function that I was just wanting to cover here briefly. So when the page is ready, that's the dot ready, function wrap function. Then down here for every one of our keys in window, if it's a function, window at key. So it's redefining the function to be wrap function, window key key. I find that so interesting. And so it's going to log all of this information, the function name, the parameters, the return value, and the call stack, how it got there, the functions that called which functions that called which functions that got us there. So that solved a big problem that I was having is like, okay, how do I start a Selenium WebDriver instance and then put all my breakpoints and then automatically capture the information and then continue? But we don't have to do that. We can just wrap stuff in these types of wrapper functions. All right, so let's see here what it came up with for Stanza Designer. So basically put it all into my plugin code, which is fine. So again, the goal here is I want just anybody who comes up with ideas to be able to manifest them, be they lyrics or database ideas or interface ideas or systematic ideas that combine interface and database and backend, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of the big picture. I like to just try to brainstorm as many problems as I can and then try to solve the problems, because a lot of times you find common denominators and strands that are woven through all of them. Like, for example, I see a lot of connections between writing a book and writing a complex system with a front end, a back end, and a database. And lyrics too. I mean, it's kind of its own challenge, but there's a lot of intricacies and things that rely upon other things, dependencies. And I mean, it's, in a way, it's kind of a stupid example, but it's kind of like solving a Sudoku puzzle, which I liked to do when I was a kid. I haven't done it in years. But once you find one, the more that you solve in the puzzle, the more you flesh out and figure out, the less choices you have. And the more you start just honing in on the final outcome. So how do we start, solving it? Okay, so let me do a new WinMerge, one of my favorite tools. This allows me to see, okay, what's it changing? It's taking out my comments. I don't know why it's taking out my syllable mapping. I kind of want to keep that. Probably because I'm not using it. So fetch initial suggestions. Fetch word suggestions. Initial sound. So it made this new function here. I don't really like what I'm seeing so far. Fetch word suggestions. I don't know why it's calling this 3 different ways. Add word. So when I type a word in, it's going to look it up, see how many syllables. Here's the word suggestions. Yeah, I don't like that. Let's complain here. I don't like the fetch word suggestions. It may have, or I may have multiple concurrent requirements for final sound and vowel sound, or initial sound, it's a typo, vowel sound, and final sound. Any combination of these and or number of syllables. And I've learned before I just fire off the first idea that I come up with, I like to just keep scrolling through and see what else might be worth mentioning in the reply. Render word suggestions. So again, if you don't know programming and you can't read code, that's totally fine. You could also just save the code, see what it does, and then complain based off of behavior and aesthetics and what it does, how it acts. So it's adding a key down listener on the enter. That makes sense. That's the main. Okay, so going back at here at the chatbot. Okay, so something else. This is probably a good time to mention this, and I don't want this to be too long of a stream. It is fun doing development streams, but I just want to get out my major thoughts at this point. Another thing that I'm thinking about is reading and interpreting these responses. So at first, when you start using ChatGPT, it's like, wow, it's writing in English and it's writing in code and it's other languages too and all this stuff. But really what we need to understand is it's writing in Markdown. And the Markdown consists of English and of code. So Markdown is... See, we don't really need this anymore. Here's Markdown. There's these headings, which are one hashtag, two hashtags, or three hashtags for heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, respectively. So if it's just one hashtag, it's going to be a really big heading. Two hashtags a bit smaller, three hashtags smaller still. When there's two asterisks on the other side, it's bold text. One asterisk is italicized text. Code, it says here, is in single ticks. I also see a lot of times triple ticks. Here we go. Fenced code block, triple ticks. Here's how it does tables. And there's other types of syntax as well. And it's very weird because you don't really see it here. It's automatically turning it into HTML on this page, pretty printing it, if you will. Where you start to see this is when you start looking at these actual responses that you get. So I have this page here called Code Prompt, where I can send a message across and get the response. And I also do something similar to how ChatGPT does it, where I break it into sections if it has a fenced code block, as that last page called it. I do the syntax highlighting, the darker background to just make it clear it's a different section. I have a copy button. I put the language if it's known. Sometimes it doesn't say that. Then the text blocks, as I call them, as well. And I've done enough iterations that I've worked through a number of weird peculiarities that might pop up. And one of the big things that I decided is I'm going to save off all of these prompts and responses. And I have a big folder here, fetched code. Kind of curious, I haven't looked really how big this folder is. How many entries there are, let's see. Wow, only 448. Which was like my biggest stash of these types of files until I found I can just download the dump of all my conversations with ChatGPT. And that dwarfs this. I have like 6,000 chat messages, 6,000 conversations with ChatGPT. And I now have an apparatus for viewing what's going on here. So for example, I can click, this is for ChatGPT, which is in a separate folder. I can click load JSON, and this is like a historical question I have, but I can switch between pretty print and markdown. And you can see this markdown format here. The 3 hash signs means it's a header. And the 2 asterisks means it's bold text. And so I started seeing this, obviously, when I was talking via the API calls. And I'm like, what is this double asterisk? It's so annoying. It was even more annoying when I still have this page. I don't use it very much anymore because they added voice to ChatGPT. But I had, let's see, AI help. Second. Kind of forgetting what my password is here. It's been a while. Okay, there we go. And what's cool is I have this up on my own website where I can just, if I'm out and about, use it. Although I don't tend to need this anymore because why pay for text-to-speech when you can just use ChatGPT's functionality? The benefit of using, I built so much around this back in the day. The benefit of using text-to-speech is I had all the files laying around. Let me find that page. I think it's this. So I could search for etymology. Render recent. And then I can listen back because these files are still on my server.
The word delve has a rich etymology that traces back to ancient roots and has evolved in both form and meaning over many centuries. It primarily means to dig or to excavate, and over time its usage has expanded metaphorically to include thorough research or investigation into a subject.
And so I was always thinking like, well, if I have a bunch of interesting texts in audio format, I could just make videos out of it. Obviously, I haven't really done too much with that yet. But I don't even know why I brought this up. This is just another page I made where I can ask a question. I can either hit Get AI Help or Get Deeper Help. Get Deeper Help has like an additional step it does where it asks for interesting follow-up questions. And does a step 2 where it automatically pursues the follow-up questions. And then it stitches it all together into one big audio response. But that's what I was bringing it up for. I would run into this issue where it'd be like, asterisk, asterisk, whatever. So, and then it would talk about it. Asterisk, asterisk. So whenever it got to a header, which would be frequently, it would say like asterisk out loud, which is really annoying. It would say hashtag, 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 Greek history, etc. All right, but let me find an example here since I've saved all of my... Well, let's do this one here. So this is one that's on my actual computer for... that I did via code prompt, this page here. And what I'm starting to realize is that there's a lot of context clues that can help us. So it's almost, the possibilities are almost endless. I think you could almost say they're endless. In that there's the way we prompt these LLMs, which can really dictate how they respond. And then there's the ways that we use and act upon what they give us. And to me, it's just, it's pretty exciting to think about how to use this new tool that we have. So for example, I sent some code over. I said, it's actually, the formatting's bad here. I just threw this page together yesterday. But the response format is the most important thing. So it tells me, for example, config.php, then it gives it to me. Main.php, then it gives me the code. Also, I see here it says, continue with your code using the settings above. So one issue here is if I was like, oh, this is main.php, and I just replace the entire code with this, it would miss this key part at the bottom, which is basically saying a lot of your code is going to stay the same. We just changed this top little bit here. So it's important to read the comments and the headings and also any text. I call this like the last line before the code block. Actually, the last line here would be config.php. So something I've been playing around with is how can we train BERT models to help us understand the responses so that we can act upon them. I built this the other day. Basically, I have like 1,000 or so entries, more than 1,000 entries. Some of them I made with what's called synthetic data, which is where if you have a lot of examples, you can just pass it over to another language model and say, make me more of these types of examples. So good for when you're training a model to have more variety. Let's search in here. I bet you, yeah, this one doesn't, actually it does exist. Continue with your code using the settings above. So I must have already included this because I have, for example, a whole bunch of new tools. Let's see. It's before that. Right here. No, that's the train model. This is where I actually train a model based off this data that I'm showing you right now. I'm trying to find where I actually get the comments. get comments. Well, no. Right here, I think. Get comments extracted from code prompt PHP. So I have this command I can run, and it'll do this for me. And it looks in my fetched code, which we just reviewed has, well, this is my ChatGPT. The other one has like 500 saved conversations. And what it can do is basically open up the JSON, stored in JSON format. And it gets these code blocks, which is how I parse out and render. So there are going to be text code blocks and code blocks. Sometimes the language that the code is in is the type, or it'll just say code. And what I can do is extract all these / comments. So I need to build something else for Python comments, which will be #. And basically I just write it to a file. And then, see if I can find that file. So it's pretty much this, except for I alphabetized it. And so I can go through here and just be like, okay, what are all these comments? Are there any comments that I can use and leverage and train a model based off of it? And this is why I was thinking about how great it would be if we could get into the 7 billion parameter model training. The problem with that is it takes a lot of compute to train it. And then it's no small task to actually deploy it and to use it. With a BERT model, it's really easy to train, really easy to deploy and to use. Is it as powerful? I don't know. It's up in the air. I need to test out the 7 billion model. You would think the 7 billion would be way more capable. In a lot of ways it is, because the 7 billion parameter model, or excuse me, these language models in general, the transformer ones, well, not all of BERT is also transformer, but a lot of these models synthesize text, and that's what's so cool about them. They can write code, they can write poems, they can do all this stuff. BERT doesn't even try to do that. And so what's great is due to it's smaller, but it doesn't try to do as much. So there's the possibility that it can do text classification better. I'm not sure. But there's other things it just can't do. For example, you could train a 7 billion parameter model to tell you, is this, for example, we were looking at some headers. Like here, say we're trying to understand what this header is. And it's ### config.php. Excuse me, it's ** config.php ***. We could have a language model tell us that this is a code header and then tell us the name of the file that it's a header for. Kind of a bad example because that's easy to parse out using other means, but you can do both information extraction and classification in one pass. You can basically train it to do all sorts of crazy stuff as far as generating some short little summary or translation of text to your liking. And it's really a shame that it's not easier for us to leverage that technology and deploy it. But it's amazing that BERT is within our wheelhouse, much more user-friendly. And by the way, timtruth.com, my Substack, has a great library, Python library for training your own BERT models. And I think we really should be collecting data sets. Like, I have a number now. At least 3. I've got 3 up right now. I've got this one that tells me for my book, all the book entries, if they meet the formatting requirements, as far as wanting like a little short definition. The best analog etymon. So for example, for abrupt, Latin abruptus, these very similar words, but you can see the connections. You can see sometimes it's Old French, sometimes it's Greek, sometimes it's Latin. And then the breakdown of like the morphemes. So ab meaning away from, and ruptus meaning broken. But it can tell me to fairly high accuracy, it could be better, whether it meets the grade or if it needs work. So I can focus on the ones that need work and automatically build it into my workflow. This one here tells me for the first line of an LLM's response, is it actually part of the content or is it superfluous? Is it extra? Like, what an excellent inquiry. A lot of times I just want to remove this and forget about it and never read it. Especially if I'm working on a system that has, for example, thousands and thousands and thousands of entries. For example, this one here. I don't think this is a real database. Let me find one. So for example, here I have 36,000 words from the Middle Little Greek lexicon. And I have like a little short entry text for each of them. If I want to do an additional bulk AI job and bring in more information, another column for each of these records, I don't want each of them to say, what an amazing question. Oh, that's an awesome question. That's just annoying and over the top. So I was thinking, okay, what if I start training and collecting examples where I want to delete it and examples where I don't want to remove it? And this is, just 250 examples at this point. But the beautiful thing is, once you start collecting the data, that's where you really start opening some doors, unlocking some doors. Because you could plug that into a Llama or whatever, Mistral or Qwen 2 or whatever 7 billion parameter model you want to train. You could train a BERT model. Those are two of the big options there. Or you could do something manual with code, not even manual, but you could write some code to try to figure out the pattern and then see how well it does. But the models presumably will just keep getting better and better, and the computers will keep getting better and better. And if we start collecting data sets, then we can just hit the ground running whenever we get a new model. Another one that I was training here is it a keep code comment? Or in other words, is it a placeholder for existing code? Those I want to be on the lookout for. For example, I could have, and I do have, this page here. See the recording button up top is lit. So in the background, what it's doing is it's regularly checking my files. And it's seeing, is there any updates to these files? One thing I could do is, if there's an update to the file, I could check, are there any comments that say your existing code? Because that's a red flag that I just lost some code, right? That I just copied and pasted something in there and didn't notice that it said to merge my existing code in. Or better yet, I could, this was actually what I was thinking about when I first built this page, not so much to copy it and go off and paste it into ChatGPT, but to actually plug into the LLMs and then hit improve or something. And then the response comes back behind the scenes and it would, I was thinking a couple of different variations of this, but one variation would be it opens up like something like WinMerge, but in the browser, where I can actually see the differences, where it's adding code, where it's subtracting code. And the more work that the computer could do to set things up, so I don't have to look and go hunting for where it says your code here, and then bring my code across. It should just do that automatically. It should be able to detect that it's referencing existing code, see what that code is there. And it should be pretty straightforward and kind of boring to transfer that in. Because if there was any changes in there, it would have specified what the changes are. So this is basically saying, yep, everything's good to go. Keep that other part as it is. And this is actually great because it's saving us money as far as these LLM calls. You know, you see some people try to get around this by saying, give me every single line of code back. Don't lose a single piece of code. And then that becomes a problem because what if your code's too big and you're not changing that much? You really want to get the entire code back? If you're emailing your friend and asking, hey, can you help me debug this? Can you help me add this feature? And he or she responds and says, this is the section that you'd want to enhance. Here's the improvements. And then they put like, keep this part as you had it. Like, you don't want them to send you the whole thing back and you have to go sifting through for what changed. So actually, I get the point of why the model would want to just say, put your existing code. But I was pretty impressed. I trained a model on this. It's over 1,000 examples. I think it was 99.3% accurate on the validation set, which is important because you have like 80% of your data you want to train on, and then 20% that you want to validate with. And so it never sees that 20% as far as improving the model. It's only just using that as a yardstick to see how good it is, how well it's doing. And that can be really helpful because you might be able to brainstorm 100 different ways to train a model or to organize your architecture for the model. And there's something called overfitting. And so if you have versions of your model that overfit to the training data but don't actually do well to the 20% that you set aside to see how well they do, you want to be able to tell that that's what happened. So it's very useful to set aside 20% of your data or some percentage just to gauge how well it's actually doing. But my point is we should be thinking about data sets like this. And for BERT, it's very simple. We just want to have a column here for the label, as it's called. In this case, yes or no. In this case, good or incomplete. Another yes or no. Again, it's super easy to use my library that I put out to Substack supporters. Link in the description. Or just go to timtruth.com. You could also use ChatGPT to write something similar. Although I think my code is great because it's super reusable. And I've tested it a number of times. We've improved it a number of times. And it's really solid code. More to come on that, by the way, about how to deploy it even more efficiently. As we've talked about, I have this Python script that'll spin up a server that you can hit for web tools that you're making or scripts that you're writing to make predictions for you. But then there's also other types of models that we could train, and we'd want different types of data sets. For example, I was working on one today. Let me see if I can find this. Also, I kind of wanted to talk about this some more. Maybe I can just open this in a browser. The thing I wanted to show. I don't want to lose my spot. I think it's projects. LLM fine-tune. I was working on this a bunch today. And it's kind of fun to be able to spin up so much code with ChatGPT and the like. Then if you hit a wall, it's like, well, I guess I could just continue this later if I find a way around the wall. But this is the code I was trying to find here. All right, I'll just open with LibreOffice. One second. Okay. So for example, this isn't even a great example, but you can have custom tags. Like the way that these chatbots work, they use something called ChatML. And so they have base models. Let me maybe show some examples here. So let's see, Mistral 7B v 0.1. So if I click over here, my name is Tim, and I am an aspiring writer. I am a married father of 2 wonderful children and live in the Midwest. It's not true, but what it's basically doing is it's taking what I put in there, and because it's a base model, it just guesses the next word, and the next word after that, the next word. Technically, it's guessing the next tokens. And sometimes there might be multiple tokens per word. And this is the technology that these chatbots are built off of. But you might note a very different behavior here. This is like guessing where I'm going with my writing. Whereas when I use a chatbot, I say, hi, let's see. My name is Tim and I am, if I sent this over to, let's say Llama 370 billion, this is their instruct version. It says, hi Tim, it's nice to meet you. You're saying you're ... So it's responding to it. It's actually told behind the scenes, you are a helpful assistant. And it's just saying, hi Tim, as if it has to respond to it. The only difference in these types of models, and by the way, Llama 3 puts out the instruct base and instruct versions of all their models. The instruct model is actually what's called a fine tune of the base model. So the base model just predicts the next word. But then they train their models with this last training step called fine tuning to be instruct, like chatbot assistant bots. But that's not the only way to take these base models. So I really wish I could. I wish I had the funds to just be able to get like a couple big graphics cards, and I might just start renting for short periods of time, say from RunPod or what's the other one, Lambda. These things that rent out the GPUs. Because I want to see what these models can do. These base models fine-tuned. But let me see if I can show you what ChatML is. Yeah, here we go. Although it's a bit... Okay, here we go. So they have these special tokens. And so this one here is basically saying, I'm starting a message, IM start. I guess like instant message, or I don't know what IM stands for. And then system is the role. And it says basically behind the scenes, you are ChatGPT, a large language model trained by OpenAI. Answer as concisely as possible. It's some other information, IM end. So these conversations actually, what it would do is if you typed into the box, how are you? So you're on ChatGPT and you type in, how are you? I don't want to do it because that's going to put it into my history. But it's going to basically send all of this information here, including the IM start after, actually probably IM start assistant, it would say. And then what it's doing is the base model's predicting the next tokens. And they train it with this type of data in this format, including the system prompt, which is like the high level role that the system's supposed to take on. And then also the user prompt and what the assistant should say. And also maybe some back and forths with the assistant and the user. But it all starts with the base model. So you could train your base models to do different things, such as classification and information extraction. So you send some text, it tells you a classification, and then it might do a secondary task, which is pulling out information. For example, I was looking at one today. That's kind of where this idea came from down here, but it's kind of basic. The thinking is, though, you could train it, well, I'm still trying to think of how it would actually work in practice. I don't know if you'd send, for example, the input with clause and clause end, and then you'd start the task 1 and do next token prediction. Or if you're training it to give you that output from this input and this is all you need. Not exactly sure, but let me see. Somewhere around here. Not that one. Okay, here's the one I was looking for. Okay, so data formatting with special tokens. So I was asking, like, would I want to use special tokens like ChatML? And it said, yes, using special start and end sequences similar to ChatML and how instruct models are trained can be very useful when fine-tuning a model. Clear delimitation or delineation of input and output. Enhanced task performance. So for example, CLS, which I think stands for clause, I'm not sure. It's really just made up. Customer review, I love the battery life of this phone, but the camera could be better. Clause end. And then it has two responses. Task 1, sentiment is positive. Task 2, product, phone, feature, battery life, camera. And then the training data is input, the clause section, and the output is the two tasks with start and end tags. So I've been really chomping at the bit wanting to play around with this and see, for example, given I already have my data sets, which is doing great with BERT, which I love that BERT is manageable model sizes and I can actually run on my computer. But I'm wondering, like, how much would it buy me to have a 7 billion parameter model? I think BERT's like a million parameters versus 7 billion. But like I said earlier, these 7 billion models are, a lot of their memory goes towards writing text as opposed to just classifying text. So it's apples to oranges. All right, let's go back to this since I don't want to go on too long. But for example, now I can look at all the comments in my, I guess this is mostly JavaScript, jQuery. What other languages use double slash? Did I use? I mean, obviously like Java, but I don't think I've been writing too much Java. I mean, it's mostly going to be, PHP is the other one. PHP or JavaScript. So I just have all of these comments and I can look through here. And what's interesting here is this is actual responses from, in this case, just various LLMs. There's another one I have somewhere around here that's all ChatGPT. Right here. This one's all ChatGPT comments. You can see I have 16,000 lines. So I could search like existing. There's a lot of content here, or examples. Let me do / existing. So existing, fn prompt to run manager code remains unchanged. Existing Ajax request with other functions. Existing code to display text. Existing code, lots of those. So let me see, for example, I can come back up to my data set. Do I have existing code ... No, and that one's all over the place. So obviously I need that. Also, I don't really want to have a bunch of duplicates, although maybe it might be beneficial to have some duplication on ones that are so prevalent. But just to show you another thing that I like to do that's really helpful is also this page here is super helpful. I basically rewrote the start page that you see so oftentimes on browsers like Chrome and Firefox, but then they start selling the space to advertisers, which I find very annoying. Like it defeats the whole purpose of having like the pages I go to the most and then have at the very beginning of the list like these terrible big companies I hate. And so I just made my own start page. This is something I want to publish too. I think it could help a lot of people. If anybody wants it, just send me an email. If you're a Substack supporter. But I have this page here, Calcs, which I really need to turn dark mode at some point, although I don't spend too much time on this page here. But I just make new calculators here, and then this is something that ChatGPT really excels at. So I could just say, make me a dark mode calculator that removes all duplicate lines from a text box when I click the remove duplicates button. And then it's as easy as coming into my www root folder. If you're a Windows user, I recommend IIS for web servers. Super easy to use once you have it up and running. And I just come in here to index and I make a new remove duplicates.html. Spelled it wrong. Remove duplicates. And then I come in, oops. New file, save this off in the same folder. And I have this new code that ChatGPT wrote for me. Yeah, I was like, that's really short. And then I realized it's trying to be fancy here. I just want it all in one. All in one file, please. I'll do it myself. So script. I don't know why it's not putting that in the .ready. I guess because it put it at the bottom of the page. So I'll rework it a bit after I just said how easy it is with ChatGPT. Again, you can always just tell it to do revisions if you don't know exactly what to change. But I can come back here, refresh. Didn't I save? Nope. Remove duplicates. Now I've got to go find that code again. Or the outputs. Where did I put that? I think it's here. Yeah. So I just want to get the existing stuff. And then I can come back up here. Let's try it out. Ooh, it didn't work. $sign is not defined. Probably because it didn't bother to put the jQuery. So it's far from perfect, but it's a very helpful tool nonetheless. Let's try it again. There we go. So I can just copy these and come back over to my Google Docs. Make sure it's the right one. Scroll down here. Paste. Then I'd come through and just mark each one yes or no. Probably most of these are going to be yes. Existing remains unchanged. Pretty much all of these will be yes. And then the next time I run then I just do file download as CSV. And I just run it through my model trainer again. And so something I really recommend is that people start building their own data sets like this. Just 2-column data sets, inputs and outputs for training these base models. Or actually the instruct. And actually that brings up a good question. Would I want to train an instruct model or a base model? Actually, I think you'd want to train a base model for this type of task where you give it some information and then you train it to give you certain types of outputs. Unless it's very similar to a chatbot. If it's more like the Instruct where you're like, can you help me with this? Can you write me some code for this? And you're trying to fine tune the responses it gives you. But from what I hear, it can actually be trained so much farther than it is out, off the shelf if you have some substantially different use case and you have plenty of training data. So I think that's something we should try to plug into. So that's just here for the existing code comments, placeholder comments. But I'm also thinking about all these other cases. So for example, this that we were looking at earlier, being able to tell that, okay, this is talking about config.php. It's an existing file. It's giving me some new code, or maybe it's a new file. Actually, this is making a new config file. Specifically, it even says that here. You can create a separate PHP file named config.php. And given the prompt too, where I said, let's move the settings into a config file. So if I already know that I'm asking for a config file, then obviously it's going to give me a new file. So it's very interesting to me to think about, okay, how can we actually parse out this text that is given back? Again, I think it's important for us to remember it's going to be in Markdown. And it's going to be then, once we account for the Markdown, in English and in code, in the case of code generation. So, like I said at the onset, code generation is solved. Well, not completely, but it's a thing, right? Code generation is a thing. ChatGPT, all these other models can generate tons and tons of code. The problem is, how do we actually use it and steer it? And it's like this brand new way of computing. It's really like this huge transformative technology. Anybody who's in tech knows how big of a paradigm shift this is. So I'm just trying to brainstorm and get out ahead of this, especially because I think that there's like a window of opportunity here, which might not be permanent, especially for things like training our own models. That was one thing I kind of started the stream off with, is that Anthropic CEO talking about, oh, we don't want the models to be able to, what did he call it? Autonomously self-replicate. In other words, he doesn't want users, the peasants, to be able to make their own models. That's how I read that. And they want it to be very lobotomized, and they don't really want to give people too much power. That's how I see it. And they'll come up with all these different excuses, all these different reasons why only the companies and the governments can leverage these new information turbines. And so one of my tactics is I look for what they don't want me to do, because that tends to indicate where I can be a threat. In a good sense of the term, right? To evil bastards, being a threat's a good thing. And yeah, they're really freaking out about this cat coming out of the bag, and they want to control it. And he even said as much, like, we don't want there to be a race to the bottom, he said, which is basically just everybody getting access and it being super cheap, and anyone can do what they want. He's like, no, we want to have a race to the top. And we want to, he said, showcase and lead the way about how we can be responsible and safe. And then we can pressure other people. Employees of companies can pressure their companies to do the same and to take the same precautions. And then the governments can pass regulation, he said. That's something that they keep harkening on. The government's coming in with the regulations. So I'm actually kind of horrified at a field that I love, which has been so unregulated, which is programming. And like this big iron fist that's coming down on it. And so I'm kind of looking at this maybe as being like the last hurrah of programming before it gets totally ruined by the establishment forces. They're already telling people, don't learn how to be a programmer. Don't learn how to program. just a waste of your time. Don't do it. And then they have these big press conferences with the CEOs of these AI companies. And it's just, the whole presentation will be about, oh, we hope they regulate us. We need everyone to be regulated. This is a huge threat to our democracy. Blah, 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 right? And then here's the Q&A session. It's just reporter after reporter saying, how do you want them to regulate us or you or the small companies? Or it's just all like about regulate. And I'm just like, oh man, we've got to do better than this. We have a short window of time. So they really don't want us to train models. They don't want us to compete with them. And interestingly, they're so afraid of us having power and so afraid of us having intelligence that they're trying to front run the whole thing and then pull the ladder up behind themselves, which is kind of an interesting approach if they don't want us to have intelligence, to throw a bunch of intelligence at us, to buy themselves some leeway, to make themselves the authorities in the situation, right? And to get everybody turned on them so that people think they got a win. People thought they had a win when Suno and Udio were getting sued. Still are being sued, right? That is not a win in my book. That's people like turning on music creation machines, on like instruments. Like people say, no, we have to outlaw guitars because of this certain type of music we don't like. Or because this is a threat to working musicians, so nobody can buy guitars. That kind of thing. I mean, the same thing actually happened with synthesizers back in the day. There's big pushback with recorded music. So I just find it all fascinating. I'm just kind of glued onto Twitter, seeing the breaking news. And there's been a few and far between as far as new, what they call frontier models with new capabilities. They clearly could just flick a switch and make it so much more powerful. But they are obviously dragging their feet. So again, kind of the big breakthrough that I had mentally is there is a lot that could be achieved, even without these 7 billion parameter models, which would be fun to train and see what they can do. But just in terms of using BERT and breaking down the constituent parts of the responses, see if I can find it. So, obviously we've talked about the other breakthroughs. We kind of touched on it earlier today. Having workflows, starting with the kernel, a really solid seed. I kind of like the metaphor of the seed. It's pretty amazing that something like so small, the seed, or the gametes for mammals, can dictate exactly what's going to grow from it, right? You don't take a tomato seed and see apples coming out of a tree grown from it, right? The seed dictates what's going to happen. Similarly, how we start our projects, be it books, lyrics, or systems. The seed, like the first little kernel of an idea that we have, is the most important thing to dictate the rest. We need to keep the direction. Now, it's not as deterministic as a seed in this case. There's other steps along the way where you could go wrong or right. And I think it's very important to organize and to stay on track and to outline. I think outlining in broad strokes before the fine strokes is a very important protocol. I love the expression, measure twice, cut once. And so I think workflows are a great approach. I hate agents. The more I think about it, the more I hate agents and all these people pushing agents. For example, let me show this. This guy here of LangChain, Harrison Chase, there's been this whole crew of people pushing agents as like this new way of doing things and this brand new technology, and it's so much better. And then today he posted this, and I'm like, what the hell? What is an agent, he said, after telling us basically, well, I'll read my reply in a second. I get asked this question almost daily. We build tools to help developers build LLM applications, especially those that act as a reasoning engines and interact with external sources of data and computation. This includes systems that are commonly referred to as agents. My definition is perhaps more technical than most. An agent is a system that uses an LLM to decide the control flow of an application. So this is completely different than what we were told initially by everyone who was pumping agents. And, someone like Harrison here has a lot of money to be made. I think they raised like $100+ million, big investors a couple of weeks ago, because of all this fervor that people spin up about agents and companies that go around saying, well, we need some agents. We need AI agents. And the whole premise initially was like, okay, you spin up a project design agent. You spin up a quality assurance agent. You spin up a front-end design agent. You spin up a back-end design agent. You just throw them in a pot and you give them a task and they all like delegate and divide up the work and accomplish it. And now he's like totally changing the definition of what we were all told agents are, because it doesn't work. That approach doesn't work. As much as people wanted it to work, as much as people experimented and tried it. But the building block here is the prompt and the response. LLMs take input, they give output. And people need to understand like what's the value of that? What could it actually achieve? How do you piece it together into larger systems and workflows? And that's where, what we've talked about on this channel, the workflow approach. Very structured approach where you have parsers at each step, potentially, guiding the approach, and then human oversight checking along. That's a million times more valuable than the things people are pushing with agents. Now they're changing the definition to be like, well, it's just anything that uses an LLM, which is stupid too, because an agent is not a system that uses an LLM. An agent would just be any system that does anything, right? So why is he throwing LLMs in here? Because that's what his company does, LangChain. So I just thought that was kind of funny. I don't really care. Somebody says, agentic AI in 2024 has been a huge disappointment overall. He says, why? It's pretty amazing. He doesn't know why people are disappointed in agents. And then I said, the entire premise was LLM prompting and workflows is passe and unfashionable. Better to spin up a few AI agent roles working together to solve problems. Yet there are no working examples of this being superior or really working at all. Now we're getting dictionary rewrites to try to make it work. So agents have been a complete failure. And I suspect they'll continue to be a failure because they're just going to spin their wheels, go in circles, and deviate and deviate and deviate from what you really want. You got to keep it on rails. I forgot why I even brought that up. So yeah, I'm just trying to brainstorm, like, how do we parse out the responses that we get? This is just one of many different types of formats that we might get back. I could load up some other ones here. Let me just show you. I mean, there's just a whole big variety of different types of responses you could get back. Sometimes it'll say like your code here, this is your current code. Replace this with this code. And so if we just understand these various different types of ways that it could express revisions or new code or deleting code, we could easily plug it into a feedback loop and improve and improve and improve. Ultimately, I think at this point, there's still going to be a human watching over and seeing if it's going in the right direction. If it's not, okay, let's revert back, try this again. And some tasks are much easier to accomplish than others. Some of them are very, very possibly achievable in just one pass, or just one pass with a few revisions. For example, a conversation in ChatGPT can get a lot done, especially if you utilize revisions and say, oh, that doesn't actually meet my requirements. It needs to do this, this, and this, or I'm getting this error. You can do a lot with just a couple of revision requests. But there's some systems that are just so much more involved. And then there's other cases where we do the same thing over and over again. Like, I can't tell you how many different times I've built a backend in PHP slash the database in PostgreSQL, and then listings and jQuery plugins and forms to do edits to records and to save off changes, to view and save changes. So anytime we have something like that you're doing over and over again, you can come up with the perfect prompts and then fill in what changes between them on each given go. So I'm still thinking hard about how to go forward here. I'd love to just be able to prompt like, I need a reusable neural network training library. I want to just specify what changes from run to run, the network architecture, the activation function, the number of training epochs, the CSV file to train from, the numerical categories. This might sound familiar because I actually wrote this. It's on my Substack. A very awesome neural network training library. But that took a lot of going back and forth. I used the LLMs to help me, but it took a lot of debugging and clarification of what I meant. And it's pretty amazing, though, what these LLMs can do. But then it's fun to think about, how do we take that to the next level? Because it's already cheap. There's the expression, talk is cheap. And it's never been so cheap. So then the question is, like, what do we do with it? And it's kind of a fun. I don't play video games. I don't do puzzles. I don't watch sports. I don't watch television. Don't watch movies. But this, has me at the edge of my seat, really trying to crack this code. And like I said, I just come up with things I want to build all the time. Like, I want to build a neural network that plays a game of Snake, and just to understand, like, okay, how fast could you train such a model? What would the training process look like? What would it look like as it got better and better? And then, the lessons that you take from that could be applied to something much more serious. Anytime you're confronted with the need to train a computer to make, to choose from a couple number of actions as it's guiding along, something called reinforcement learning, that you can either like penalize it or give it points, and it tries to optimize getting the most points as possible. And it's not hard to start thinking about, like, wow, you could really apply that to a whole bunch of useful use cases, right? So I'll leave it here because I don't want to go on too much longer, although there's a lot that I still haven't done or covered. Again, check out groupdiscover.com. I share all the interesting videos I find there. And check out timtruth.com for all the code that I'm publishing. I'm trying to come up with very useful libraries and then send them out to all the supporters to thank people for supporting the show. So thank you, and have a great rest of your night. If you want to reach me, it's timtruth@protonmail.com. Thank you, and good night.